the eye in it in comparison to this huge head in both of the two giant hornets. And when I talk about, most of my talk will be about Vespa sorer, because that's the hornet I had experience with in Vietnam. But everything about its biology and what it does sounds like it's exactly like Vespa mandarinia that's currently the focus of most activities out there in the Pacific Northwest. So what happens? Well, these queens overwinter, as I've already alluded to. They go quiescent. They can go into the ground, into the soil. They can go into sawdust. They can go into the wood pile of wood, under some bark, into a nice pallet as for goods that are being shipped to Canada, into some styrofoam chips and some goods being shipped overseas. And then in the spring, when it gets warm enough, she comes out, becomes active. This is the same life cycle of your yellow jackets and that you have already native to the Western Canada and all across Canada. And they come out and they find a place to nest. For these giant hornets, it's generally in the ground, in a hole in the ground. And then they build a single comb, big, with a papery envelope around it. And then they start to rear a set of brood. And then as the more hornets emerge, these young hornets start to come out. A few weeks later, they take over foraging and building the nest, and they gradually actually dig out the dirt, expand the cavity, expand the number of combs. Mature nests will have 4 or 5 combs. The largest one will be about a ½ meter in diameter. They're very big combs. And at the end of the season then, well, we'll get to that. So here's just a rough idea of what might happen with the population in one of these nests of hornets. So it starts here with a queen that's been overwintering, the dashed line. She becomes active, forages for nectar, looks around for a place to nest, starts a nest, and rears the first set of young larvae and pupae. Then they hatch. So in this example, I've shown. Can anybody else hear all that I'm hearing, the background noise? Glenda, can you hear the background noise that I'm getting from people?
I can hear it.
Yeah, I wish whoever has got their mic on could turn it off, please. So in this example, I'm showing that about 10 workers were reared. I honestly don't know how many are reared in the first brood cycle, but it's probably small, like 10 or 15. And then they proceed to rear some more. And just like in honeybees, after swarming, there's a period there where no new individuals emerge, and then all of a sudden you have a big emergence. And now there's continuous brood rearing over the summer. The numbers go up just like COVID cases in the United States. And eventually they get up here where there's enough workers in the nest that they begin to rear a new set of queens and males. They have the same sex determination that honeybees do. An unfertilized egg gives rise to a male. Fertilized eggs can be workers or queens. So they rear a new set of reproductives. But as they're doing that, they're rearing fewer workers. So gradually the number of workers is decreasing. And pretty soon all you've basically got is a bunch of reproductives. They leave the nest. Males apparently find nests and hang out near the entrance waiting for new queens to emerge. And they mate with them there. And the evidence is they mate just a single time. And then those queens go off. We don't know if they disperse, how far they disperse, but they end up going off and overwintering again in the soil or the logs or wherever it is they overwinter. And for about 5 months, they're just in a quiet state wherever they've decided to spend the winter. This is where we think most of the queens that come to North America of any of these hornets, or to come to France or wherever, they're almost all likely to be coming in as overwintering queens, because there's a period there of several months when they can go on a ship from one place to another, get off the ship, and then become active. So I just want to give you a bunch of images. These again are Vespa sorer. You can see the color of the abdomen here on these worker hornets, where we've got orange and a band of yellow and black, as opposed to mandarinia that had the series of black bands across each abdominal segment. And so here's one of our hives in Vietnam that we were monitoring. And these are 2 hornets that have come up to try to catch a couple bees. So in this video, you'll have a hornet that shows up and it's going to chase down a bee. It's going to hunt it down, got it, off it goes with it, it takes it, it flies up into the trees, and then it flies off with it to home. So initially, hornets come to beehives and they catch individual bees. And that goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4 bees. But at some point, something in their little brain goes on and they go, oh, there's more than just individual bees here. There's a whole bunch more inside. And at that point, the worker that's the scout that has found that nest decides, I don't know how, that she's going to recruit her nestmates. And of all the hornets, those 22 species that exist in the world, the only 2 species that recruit their nestmates to food like this are the 2 giant hornets, Vespa mandarini and Vespa sora. So there you see this big hornet on the face of the colony. And here you see, watch her mark this colony with her abdomen, with a gland that's on the underside at the tip of the abdomen. And then she also will rub her legs. I don't know what that's about yet. I'll repeat this and I'll give you the sound.
Got that tail wagging. Look at this.
This is my former student.
Don't say anything for a second.
Heather Madela, who is the lead author on the paper we're just about ready to publish on this. So that marks the nest, and they also fly up into the trees and mark the leaves up above. We believe that she leaves a little odor trail, marking leaves as she goes back to the nest. She must do something back at the nest to alert her nestmates, her sisters, that it's time to go on a big raid. And they, so then after what you see is after a few minutes, you'll start to see more hornets appearing, and they don't seem to know where they're going. They're coming in and they're flying. They look like they're orienting upwind, like they're orienting toward a chemical. So we're 99% certain they're marking the colony with this pheromone and that it's helping them recruit their sisters, but it hasn't been studied. So gradually then the numbers increase. You get some of the individuals on the nest that are just fanning their wings and maybe dispersing a pheromone into the air. Others start chewing, in our situation, started chewing at the nest entrance to actually chew their way in. You could hear their mandibles, like you could hear them crunching the wood as they tried to get in. Others are actually sharing food, which is again a rare behavior in foraging hornets. I think these are the only species that do it. And then if you are within about a meter of the colony of bees, you can actually hear them. And this is what you hear as they start to, the bees respond by starting to scream inside the nest. So before that hornet showed up, you would have had a typical hum in a hive, just kind of like a little background hums, every once in a while a zip or a peep. But as soon as these hornets have shown up, they just start screaming. And that's part of the recruitment that the bees then go through for the next set of behaviors. So one of the things they do is bees will hide just inside the entrance. And if the hornet lands and gets close enough, suddenly a mass of these bees, these are the Asian hive bees, will rush out, swarm over the surface of the hornet and engulf it in a ball of bees. And I'll try to show it in this video, but there'll probably be some ads that pop up first that we have to get through, unfortunately. Yep, sport check, gotta go there. Hopefully it'll end soon.
Unlike some other yogurts.
No, I don't want that. I think I can skip this one. I can't see over there. Yeah, there we go. So this guy caught a hornet, put it on his, sorry, you gotta find where I am. Put it on a wire. Then he went over and he dangled the wire in front of the hive. Watch the bee activity at the entrance. All of a sudden you'll see them get really active, and then he puts it down, and then vroom, they swarm over the surface of it and engulf it in this ball of bees. When this happens naturally, once they've formed a good solid ball of bees, you can actually pick this knot of about 100, 150 bees up and roll it back and forth in your hands like a ball. So at the end of this, if I can skim across here, he walked it over and he set it down here. So here's the ball of hornets that he's collected. Still on the wire, and the hornet's still in the middle of them. He's going to pick it up, and then he takes the hornets off, and the the hornet has been cooked and suffocated by the bees. They literally raise their temperature up to just below their own lethal temperature, but above the wasp's lethal temperature, as well as it's such a tight ball, they asphyxiate the hornet and the hornet is killed. So this is one of the great defenses of the two giant hornet species. And we'll have a summary of them at the end. So then what we would see as we were in the apiary is we noticed that all of a sudden these spots would appear on the front of the hive, and you'll see that in the second video. But we realized, we knew that from a report that by a beekeeper, local beekeeper, that one of the things they collect is animal dung. So we put 4 kinds of animal dung out. We had pig and chicken and water buffalo and cow. The assistant who was doing this thought we were crazy. He wanted to have no part of this, going out and digging up shovels of poo and bringing it back to our little poo shop. But we set it out at the edge of the apiary, and here's what we saw. And I'll just skip to the second image. So here's a bee in side profile. You can see it on the chicken poop. And there it is, and its mandibles. It's getting a nice little wad of chicken poo in its mouth. Really wants you to have some honey from Asian hive bees. I can see you're thinking that idea in your head right now. And then back at the hive, we mark some of these bees on the poo, and then our marked bees would show up a minute or 2 later at the hive, and they would start doing this.
Can I have some help?
And why isn't it showing? Because there, no,
Yep,
it skipped
on.
ahead, sorry. Something went wrong here. There we go. So you see the bee arrive back at the hive, and it kind of rocks its head back and forth, and then it leaves a little spot behind of poo, and you can see all the other spots of poo that have been left behind. So we actually would take hives, we would wash them all off and make them clean, and then over a period of time, look at how quickly these spots build up. And because we had lots of Vespa or hornets coming to our apiary, we had lots of poo collecting and lots of spotting behavior. So that's the spotting behavior. Then they also do some what I call excited running. So if you watch this bee, where is it? Right here, this one. You can see how it just races around the front of the hive.
Okay.
Out here, out around to the side, back toward the entrance. And I think there's another one in this same video right here that's actually looks like it's applying a spot, and then look at it take off. It applied a spot of poo, and then it takes off running wildly around the nest. So this is also part of the recruitment that they have to get other bees to start to go and collect poo after they've been visited by one of these giant hornets. So I've already shown you images of the Asian bees and their defenses against these hornets. But our Western honeybee lacks virtually all of these defenses. And so again, we're going to have a YouTube video. It's probably going to pop on with some ads. I don't have any good way to cue these up and make them easy to see without.
Oh,
let me see if I can get to, where are we here? Here you see some of the hornets that have found one of these European hives in Japan. And the hornets are moving in and flying around.
Join new meeting. You will have
bees really are doing almost nothing to defend themselves. They really don't have any defenses. They come out on the surface of the hive like you would if you had visited them and they wanted to protect the nest. But against these hornets they've never experienced, they actually have no defenses whatsoever. They just chop them in half, leave the bees behind. And then after a period of time, if I can get to the right spot here, we end up with some of these videos. I don't know how they made them, but there's a couple of hornets cleaning up in business, a few bees that were left behind. Pretty ferocious. This video, by the way, is called Hornets from Hell. And you can easily search it on the internet through YouTube and find it and watch the whole thing if you want to. They are hornets from hell. I'm waiting for the videos here at the end of the aftermath here. There you go, dead bees all over the place. Outside, just masses of dead bees that have been just carved up and left to die. They don't really get a lot, they aren't as interested in the adult bees as they are the brood. So once they've managed to do this to a colony, if they've managed to destroy all the worker bees, then they move in and they actually occupy the colony. And for about 2 weeks, you'll have 10 to 20 hornets staying in the hive constantly, defending it. And that's a big risk if you're a beekeeper and the hornets have come in and taken over into your hive, because you could very easily get stung multiple times and it could be quite serious. So here's just a sort of a recap of the different kinds of behaviors that Asian bees have, all of these, and Apis mellifera over here on the right. So I wasn't able to show you shimmering, but shimmering is a behavior where when the giant hornet approaches a group of Asian hive bees and they're in the exterior of the hive, they do this kind of wave motion across the front of the hive. Our bees don't do that at all. The screaming that the bees do, our bees don't do that. You heard the screaming. The heat balling is very strong in Apis cerana, the Asian bee. There are some strains of Apis mellifera, like the ones that experience the oriental hornet around the Middle East, that have modest balling behavior, but it's not nearly enough to survive against these two giant hornets. The dung collection and hive spotting are unique to Apis cerana. And then in Apis cerana, after they've been attacked, and if the hive starts to get overrun by hornets, well, the remaining workers and queen just leave the colony, abscond and take off. Apis mellifera just gets slaughtered. So our bees don't have any defenses to speak of, our Apis mellifera, because literally they've never experienced this kind of hornet predation, so they've never been challenged with the opportunity to actually be selected over time to have these traits that exist in their populations. So what kind of risks are there to humans? Well, when they're out foraging, these hornets are really docile. When we had even when we had groups of hornets coming to a hive before they had actually entered the slaughter phase, I could literally sit and move them aside from the hive with my hand. I could bash them out of the way. I could actually hit them in the air, and never once did I get attacked or stung. So they're quite docile out foraging, not an issue. But the real issue that we end up with is once they start to get into the end of the season and they have lots of little baby wasp mouths to feed, they need lots of food. And so they switch from eating grasshoppers and spiders and crickets and things like that, mantids, over to preying on honeybees and other social wasps. And for them, they do this recruitment behavior and then the attack en masse that you sort of saw in that video. I already mentioned after they kill a bee colony, they take it over and they defend that aggressively. And as I mentioned, these hornets usually nest in the ground. So the last thing you would ever want to do would be to step on one of these nests in the ground, because every year, I know in Vietnam, I was told every year people die. They don't even report it in the news because it's just literally part of the fabric of being a farmer in Vietnam. You live in the woods, or live in the farms, you live out in nature, and as you go about your business of working around, eventually some people step on a nest and you get 20, 30, 50 stings, and it's probably fatal. If you ever were to find a nest of one of these guys, you seek help. Don't try to get rid of it yourself because you don't have any experience, and you really need like triple suits and triple gloves and triple boots, and it's unbelievable what you need to protect yourself from stings. Now, you would think that they couldn't keep bees in Japan, but they do. They keep Apis cerana, which has these defenses. But as you already saw, the hornets are pretty good at picking off individual bees. And Apis mellifera doesn't have defenses. So some of what they use are little entrance protectors like this. It's basically a queen excluder material. The bees can come and go. The hornets are kept out. But of course, as the bees are trying to get through this, there's still pretty easy prey as individual bees for the wasps. And then you have various kinds of traps like this. Here's one you can see where it's got a little screen box on top and a little like one-way bee escape, if you will, a wasp escape for the hornets that come to the entrance and want to get in. They go up in there, they get trapped up here, and then you can take the whole trap off the front of the hive and carry it away. In Japan, they sell these various contraptions for about over $100 Canadian per hive, per trap. That kind of cost in Canada with our economics would be pretty brutal in North America. So hopefully we don't have these hornets get established and have to deal with that. But if we do, I'm sure we'll figure out various kinds of traps and things we can put on hives to protect them. But it may add to the expense of beekeeping. So here I've shown you a map that shows you both the Vespa mandarinia, the species of hornet that's arrived in North America right now that seems to be potentially established. It's very common here in Korea and Japan. And then there's another race that looks different here in Taiwan. And there's yet another race that occurs over here in the mountains, over in China and Tibet and over into northern India that looks different again. So there are 3 different subspecies of these giant hornets, Vespa mandarinia. And then Vespa sorer is in somewhat warmer climates, all the way down here into southern Vietnam, where it's quite hot. Even in Hanoi, a cold temperature in the winter would be 7-8 degrees. So they're much more subtropical in where they live. Keep that in mind, because most of what we're going to see in terms of climate modeling applies to the more northern species. And obviously, if you have another species that lives in warmer places, it's going to live in slightly more southerly places in North America if they ever get here. So in North America, they collected these hornets after they found them, and they've done DNA analyses on them. Some scientists have. And it turns out that the hornets they collected from the nest in Nanaimo are very, very close to being identical to some specimens collected in Japan. So that nest almost certainly came from a queen from Japan that got introduced. But the hornets on the mainland are much more similar to the hornets in Korea. Not identical, so it's not certain that they came directly from there and maybe not somewhere nearby, but they are definitely different than the hornets that came to Nanaimo. So it just tells us that for some reason in 2018, winter of 2018, 2019, it was a really good year to get at least 2 different queens of Vespa mandarinia from 2 different locations and a queen of Vespa sorer that was found in Vancouver. So then if scientists do climate mapping, I just found this paper just before I came to do this talk. At the top here again, you can sort of see the range of Vespa mandarinia with a bunch of dots here in Korea and Japan. I can't see them because of my name screen. I hope you can see them. But what people do is you take the locations where the hornets live naturally in Asia, you collect data that exists for those localities that one can download on a bunch of different climatic variables. And then you use those climatic variables to say, where elsewhere in the world would I expect to find those same climate, that same type of climate? And what you find is that for Vespa mandarinia, that's here in China and a little bit here in the mountains here, you can see that it has a fairly large area in Europe that it probably could live, in Eastern North America, and over here in Western Canada, even down here in South America. I don't believe everything in this map, because I don't think there's any of these hornets are going to live in Greenland. Their season is, or Newfoundland for that matter, their season is just too short. They can't get a colony established and get enough workers produced to establish a colony there. Same with Alaska, but this gives you a pretty good idea of where they might live in North America. And the way this works is climate suitability is in yellow. No, the brighter the color is climate suitability. So bright red and bright yellow are both really highly suitable climates. Yellow is probably best, red's a little worse. So for example, I see me right there. They could live in, looks like they could live in Guelph, Ontario. I blew up their map. They had a different map they showed for the Pacific Northwest. This shows the localities of where they have found these hornets so far on Vancouver Island and on the mainland. And then they take this climate envelope and they say, okay, where do we expect them to live? And where they expect them to live is just about down to Northern California and all the way up potentially into southern Alaska. And the different colors are just to indicate that gradually over time, they will expand their range and move. This model assumes they're moving on their own and not moving too far each year on their own. Obviously, if they're picked up and moved around in human transported goods, queens get established elsewhere, this distribution will expand very quickly. So I want to just comment briefly on some of the other Asian hornets because there are many. We've only talked about 2 of them and there's 20 others. And well, I've already mentioned Vespa crabrow, the European hornet that was established long ago in Eastern North America. There is a hornet that was collected in the Gulf Islands of British Columbia this summer. It has not been fully identified yet, so we don't know what it was. The initial hint was that it was a different strain of Vespa crabrow than occurs in Eastern North America. But again, they're not really an issue. But these guys are an issue. They're all very closely related. And Vespa Bellatina, as you'll see in the next slides, has been introduced to Europe with devastating effects. And like Vespa sorer and Vespa mandarinia, this tends to be a more subtropical species. And Vespa similima lives in somewhat more northern areas, as you'll see on a map. So here you see the typical hunting behavior of these hornets. There's a colony of bees, and the bees are out here waiting to defend. If these are Apis cerana and they can get to this hornet, they will rush over it and grab it and ball it and kill it, eat it, cook it to death. But the hornets usually stay off a little bit, hovering, facing outwards, and as foragers are returning to the nest, they zoom out and pick them off. Now, Apis ceranas are rather small, it's pretty quick, it's pretty agile. So a lot of them avoid the predation from the hornets, but European bees, Apis mellifera, again, they've never experienced this kind of predator. And when they're coming in full of food, they're big and they're lumbering. They're like a cow going to the pasture, going to the barn to get milk. They're slow and they come lumbering in, and these guys pick them off easily and take them back to feed to their young. They don't eat the bee brood. They exist on the adult bees that they chew up and feed to their babies. But when you have even a couple of these hornets hawking at a nest, not only does it reduce the number of bees, but the bees know they're there. And even our European bees aren't totally stupid. So they go, well, I'm not going to go out and forage because that predator's sitting there waiting for me. So they sit inside, they don't forage, they don't collect enough food to store it up for the winter. And then a lot of colonies end up dying over the winter of starvation. And I saw some estimates that in various places in Europe where these hornets are well established, it's anywhere from like 1/6 to 1/2 of the colonies can die in a winter just because of a few hornets that are hawking at the entrance. So this is what happened with Vespa Bellatina. Came into a single spot here near Bordeaux in 2004. It's actually believed they came in most likely in a shipment of flower pots. It could have been an actual nest, but I've already talked about how easy it is to bring in, to transport mated queens from one place to another during the wintertime. So it's much more likely they came in as 1 or more queens. And then after a couple of years, they started expanding their range. Each year, these maps get updated and they go further and further. So they're now over much of Portugal, starting to get established in Spain, starting to get into Italy, they're starting to get into Germany, they're starting to get into England, and they're already pretty much over much of the Netherlands and Belgium. I guess Belgium completely and just starting in the Netherlands. So again, we've got those 3 species of hornets. So Vespa Bellatina that you see in the orange dots, we actually studied them as well right here where I was in Vietnam. And sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. They're in pretty cold areas, but not as cold probably as up here in Japan and China where Vespa similima lives. And then we've got this 3rd species that lives up in the mountains and in Taiwan, mountains of Taiwan. So 3 different species, all similar bee hawking behavior, all would probably have pretty bad effects on honeybees. Interestingly enough, there was a queen of similima that got introduced to British Columbia, was collected in, I believe it's 1977, didn't get established, no more records, but it also made it here at least at one time from Japan or Korea. So they've done this climate mapping for this species as well. So here you see the native range over here in China, across some of the mountains, not super high elevation, but in the foothills, up into Korea and Japan, and then doing the climate mapping to predict where they would be able to live in Europe. And you can see they've already done a lot of Portugal and this area. They haven't covered Spain, Italy or this area of Yugoslavia and elsewhere. But they're getting close to filling out their range there. Looks like they could easily survive down in southeastern Australia and in Canada. Sorry, I was not able to get a high resolution image of this, but I think it makes sense. You can see that this Vespa Bellatina is also predicted to be able to survive in Oregon, Washington, and just up into British Columbia, but not into Alberta. But over a good part of Eastern North America. And some of the people I know who study hornets are really worried about this one because they figure it has a much higher probability of becoming introduced and established in North America than either of the giant Asian hornets. So I'd like to sort of finish off here and just make the point that we've had at least 4 different species of Asian hornets. 4, 5, 4. We've had Sorer and 1 queen. We've had Mandarinia. Several queens came in and established colonies. We've had Similima 1 time. And Vespa crabera was, I think it was accidental. It's arrived. So we've had several Asian hornets. The only one that's established is the European hornet that luckily for us is not a big problem. But it looks like the climate would be very suitable for probably both of the giant hornets and both of the bee hawking hornets I just talked about. But if only a couple queens come in, they're limited by the genetic variability that's in the genes they get for the queen from her parents and from the male that she's mated with, whose sperm she stored. So they bring in very little genetic variability. And if only a couple of queens manage to make it in my opinion, the likelihood that they're going to have enough genetic variability to survive and get through the inbreeding depression that'll happen because of brother-sister mating, I think it's very likely they're going to get established. On top of that, the giant hornets, Mandarinia and Sorer, only mate with a single male. So if you think of honeybees, a single queen comes in, yeah, she's got half of the offspring she produces have genes from both of her parents, but those same offspring have genes from the 15 or 20 different males that she's mated with. A single mated honeybee queen actually arrives with potentially a lot of genetic variability. Vespa Bellatina in France mates on average 4 to 5 times. So it also has a modest amount of genetic variability in that you've got 4 or 5 males plus the genes from the 2 parents of the queen. But these giant hornets mate just a single time. Not a lot of data, but so far the 2 Mandarinia queens and 2 Sorer queens that we examined, all of them had mated just 1 time. So all of these things together reduce the risk that any of these will get established in North America. But the risk for Bellatina, just with the huge amount of traffic coming back and forth from Europe and the fact that their queens mate multiple times, I think the risk is much higher for them. So I'd like to thank people who worked with me. Heather Maddle is the lead author on the paper that hopefully will be out in the next month, finally, after 7 years of working on this. Lien Nguyen is a wasp specialist in Vietnam. Hank Pham is a bee specialist in Vietnam. Olivia, Canadian, and Ngoc, Vietnamese, were really influential in helping design methods and stuff. And we had a little army of people, or several other people, not an army, but several other people who helped us with field work in Vietnam. And of course, my own personal, I wouldn't be giving this talk probably if I had not had firsthand experience with hornets, and I owe National Geographic and their committee for research and exploration for the funding that enabled me to do the work. So that's it, and there's some of these hornets going into a nest entrance that a guy had. And then I don't know what I can see, but there's a bunch of chats here. And I've already got people saying, yes, please. I can see all the things about going for it. Okay. I don't know if anybody has any questions or if anybody's mics can be muted, but I can take any questions. And Glenda, you're there, and I think I answered your question about what Apis mellifera defenses would be compared to Serena defenses. Apis mellifera is really shit out of luck. They got the bad end of the deal. They don't have much to work with in terms of behaviors to fight off these particular hornets. I got to thank you, but I don't have any questions.
Gard, hi, this is Renata. I have a question. So we know that Apis serena has natural defense mechanisms.
I can't hear anybody right now. I don't know what's going on.
Oh.
I gather somebody heard it, or you wouldn't still be sitting there.
I heard Renata.
I can't hear you, Glenda. Do you have your mic mute?
Okay. If you can't hear me, I will type my question. You can't hear me, right, Gard?
If you can hear me, look at the chat box. It's at the bottom. Click on it and you'll be able to see the chat box. And then you can type in any question you might have.
Hi, Gard. I will type my question because you still can't hear me, right? No. Okay.
Well, I don't have any questions. Nobody's typing anything. Geez, typing. Ah. Aha. If we happen to see any of these hornets, what should we do? That's a good question. So when murder hornets hit the scene with the New York Times article and everybody else who picked it up, lots of people saw those messages. So then when they were out and about and they saw anything that looked big and unusual to them, they would snap a photo and they would send it into provincial apiarists, or they would send it to me because they had my name from some of these interviews. And so then we could look at these images and we could tell them, if they were decent enough, we could tell them if they were European hornets. We have a big wasp in southern Ontario called the cicada killer. We got a few cicada killers that got reported. But we had lots of European hornets that got reported. Remember that map of Washington and BC where you saw the few spots where the Asian hornets have been confirmed, and then you saw all the other green dots where those were all places where somebody has reported something. Those would have all been citizen science reports. Somebody who's out barbecuing or out taking a hike and went, whoa, that's a big hornet. And they would take a photograph of it and they would send it in, and then it would get identified and it would turn out that it was something else, not a giant hornet. So if you were to do a search on Washington State Asian hornet map, you will find a website that will pull up that screen, that site that I took a photo of for my talk. And for each one of those dots, you can click on it and you can actually see the record. You can see where it was, you can see what was sent in, you can see what it was confirmed to be. And for some of the sites up around that area where you had Asian hornets, when you click on it, it'll say at the top 1 of 5 or 1 of 4. That means that for that single locality, at least 4 or 5 different reports had been submitted at different times. You can see the date, you can see if it was confirmed and all that stuff. So what am I saying? So what you would want to do is try to take a photo or catch the animal in a jar, then if it's in a jar, it's easier to take a photo in some cases. Then get those to a provincial apiarist or a scientist. Leonard Foster can handle them at UBC. I'm sure there are others across Canada. Anybody who's associated with CAPA, the professional group in Canada who deals with bees, extension agents, assistant provincial apiarists, all those people, tech transfer teams, they all should pretty soon be able to identify these guys. And they'll take it from there. And what they're doing in the West right now is that as people have been reporting these hornets and they get a location, then they go to those sites and they try to search for the nests. And I had a feeling back in March or April, no, after the big report, in May or June, when they announced that they were going to be doing this, trapping and photographing and citizen science, I thought that they're going to get reports of hornets, but it's very unlikely that they're actually going to find nests. And to this point, they have, from the numbers of hornets that are showing up in different places, they are guessing they've got at least two or three different nests of Vespa mandarinia that have been established this year. But so far they haven't found any of them. And what's the date? October 22nd. If they haven't finished for the year, they're going to be done pretty soon. The snow is flying in you guys in Calgary, so in Edmonton. So they're pretty much done for this year, and they didn't find any nests. So I think now we're looking at, I think the best hope scenario is that there's just not enough individuals got introduced to North America accidentally. There's not enough genetic diversity, and my own personal twist on it will be that it's going to die out in the West in the next couple of years. We can keep our fingers crossed. So what have I got here? If the Apis cerana defense mechanism learned behaviors. No, these are all innate genetic behaviors. These are things that have been selected for. The bees have genes. So the question is, could we crossbreed Apis cerana and mellifera? Sadly, no. These are two different species, and they're enough different that when people have inseminated a mellifera queen with cerana sperm or vice versa, the eggs don't develop into larvae and they don't live. So we can't do crosses, and we don't know where the genes are in the genome, and it's going to be really difficult to like snip out genes and introduce them. So maybe someday you could introduce genes, maybe not. The other possibility one might think about would be to introduce Apis cerana from a northern location where they're pretty good honey producers and make pretty strong colonies and that overwinter well, such as in Nepal or in northern India. Those bees are resistant to varroa. They have all the defense mechanisms against these giant hornets. And the big stumbling block would be that there just doesn't seem to be much appetite for introducing a new kind of bee. But something to think about. What sort of range would these hornets have? Well, as I showed you there in that one image on the west coast, it looks like they would go along the coast. Vespa mandarinia would go from Alaska maybe down to the border of California. In their climate matching, they showed them living in Alberta in the foothills like Calgary in that area. I honestly think the temperatures are too cold there in the winter, and I don't think the queens would survive, but their climate matching suggested they would. So if they got transported over the mountains, they could potentially live there, but they're not going to cross those mountains on their own. That climate is unsuitable. So they'd have to come in trucks or come on loads of goods and so forth after they'd already been established on the west coast or the east coast. And all the other hornets, it's the same. That right now, none of them exist in Ontario. So, but we would expect Vespa Bellatina to live in the Pacific Northwest, the ones that hawk at the entrance. We would expect them to live in a good part of Eastern North America. And it would not be good for our beekeeping. Do I believe the season in Alberta is long enough? That's another good question. I know it's not long enough in Greenland. And I was in Newfoundland one time when the lilacs were blooming at the end of July. So I don't think it's suitable in Newfoundland either. It's pretty damn cold up there. That's why they call it the rock, right? There's nothing else there but rock. But Alberta's touchy. I think it's borderline, and I was surprised that their climate matching suggested they could live there. I honestly don't think any of these hornets are going to live in Alberta, personally, but we'll see. And how far would they fly from their nest? They forage up to about 8 kilometers, but a queen, once she's mated, could just ramble around in the landscape. She doesn't have a swarm of workers with her. And I don't know how far she would move. Would she move 2 kilometers, 10 kilometers? I honestly don't know. Their prediction in that one map is that they would move maybe 5, 10 kilometers a year, and that it would take maybe 15 years to get down to Northern California, 15, 20 years. But we don't really know. Nobody's been able to track them yet. I don't know if you've seen the news articles. They've been trying in Washington State to attach some tiny little transmitters to a couple of live hornets they've managed to catch. But so far, one they tried to glue it on and it fell off. Another one they tried to tie it on, and I don't know what happened there. But so far, those efforts have not been successful. So yeah, it's pretty hard to chase a hornet down across the landscape, especially when you got hilly country and forests, and it's not really a very good situation for trying to find nests of hornets. I'm glad that some of you can hear me and can actually ask questions. I actually have absolutely no idea how many people were able to hear this or see it, but I hope enough of you were that it was entertaining in some way, shape, or form. And at least I think my videos help to bring these guys to life. Like, static pictures don't give you an image of the size and how they fly and what they do. Whereas, oh, something just happened. I'm talking, okay. How far would the hornets fly? Do hornet fly? Oh, do they have the ability to multiple sting? Yes, all honeybees are relatively unique in the world in that they have a barbed stinger and that they cannot sting multiple times. The stinger gets left in the attacker, but that's extremely rare. And in almost all the other stinging insects, they just have a nice little spear that they shaft into, drive into you. Did this meeting end? I have no idea what happened here. My screen went blank. I think I'm done. I don't know. I can't share the screen. I'm still talking. I don't know if you're there. I'm going to say goodbye because I no longer can see anything on my screen. And I can just see somebody say thank you, and I guess that's.
Hi, Gard. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can still see the chat. Sorry. Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I think despite all the obstacles, we managed to get through this. My email is Otis at uoguelph.ca. So if any of you have any lingering questions, feel free to write to me and share them, and I can share them back. Well, I will share them with Renata and I will share them with Glenda, and they can distribute them back out to the group, so that hopefully if you ask any other questions, that you can get the information back to the whole group. Yeah, I can't hear you, Renata. I can see you're typing and I'm glad. But if you were able to see the screen and you could hear me, I guess we did. You can't see me fiddling with my glasses and picking my nose and all the things I do. So that's a good thing. I saved you from all that. So things are good. I think we're done, unless I see any other questions. And if we're done, oh, now something's come back on. I don't know what happened again, but not seeing any other questions. It was quite a bit of information, maybe too much, but hey, if you didn't get it all, that's fine. You got some nice images and you know a lot more about hornets than you used to.